When CEO Preston Maddox dared a simple mechanic to fix the impossible, he thought he was setting her up for humiliation. Instead, he handed her the key to unraveling the darkest secret of his empire. The summer heat rippled off the airfield as Janelle Carter pushed through the revolving glass doors of Ether Dynamics, her father's old leather tool bag clutched tight in her hand. The bag looked out of place here, worn from decades of use, its brass buckles dulled with age. Around her, men in tailored suits and women in polished heels strode past with lanyards flashing their clearance badges. The air inside the lobby smelled faintly of steel polish and money, of a world built for brilliance, but not brilliance that came dressed in scuffed work boots and faded overalls. She told herself not to shrink, not to apologize for the calluses on her hands, and when the receptionist looked her over with a thin smile and a raised brow, Janelle simply said, "I'm here for the mechanic position." Her voice was steady, her gaze unflinching. 20 minutes and 3 security checkpoints later, she stood at the threshold of Hangar 7, the beating heart of Ether Dynamics. Conversations dimmed the instant she stepped inside. The cavernous space was dominated by the Skyhawk X, a sleek machine gleaming under the overhead lights, its wings swept back like a predator poised to strike. Around it, engineers moved briskly, their lab coats flaring, while a cluster of investors in dark suits murmured with military officers. Janelle caught the smirk of one technician as he leaned toward a colleague. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn at the janitor's closet," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. She kept her jaw set, her eyes forward, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. At the center of it all stood Preston Maddox. Even if no one had pointed him out, Janelle would have KT. Noun. He carried himself like the sun itself bent toward him, his perfectly tailored 3-piece suit glinting under the lights, silver cufflinks flashing when he gestured. His voice carried across the hangar, smooth and commanding, the kind of tone honed to charm senators and silent subordinates. "Gentlemen, the Skyhawk X represents the future of American aerospace dominance," he declared, sweeping his hand toward the aircraft. Investors leaned in, military brass nodded with practiced gravitas, and cameras caught the proud set of his jaw. Then, as if fate had been waiting, the Skyhawk hiccuped. Warning lights flared on the consoles. Technicians rushed forward, tapping furiously at screens, their calm quickly unraveling. The hum of power faltered, dipping into a shudder that sent ripples of unease through the crowd. "What's happening?" one of the investors demanded. "Just a minor calibration issue," Preston said, his voice tightening beneath the mask of confidence. But the lead engineer's voice cracked through the tension. "Systems not responding to restart sequence. Auxiliary power failing." The investors shifted, whispers rising. Preston's smile faltered for a heartbeat before he forced it back, the edges sharp and brittle. He turned on his engineers with barely concealed fury. "Fix it. Now." His command rang out, but their frantic movements betrayed the truth. They couldn't. From where she stood, Janelle studied the diagnostic monitors flickering across the room. To anyone else, the fluctuations were noise, a jumble of data. But she had seen this rhythm before, traced it with her father's steady hand guiding hers across blueprints at their kitchen table. The airflow was choking, fuel mixture too rich, tertiary valve under pressure. The machine wasn't broken, it was strangling itself. She whispered it under her breath, half to herself, but Liam Rivas, a junior technician, standing nearby, heard. His head snapped toward her, disbelief written on his face. And then Preston saw her. His eyes, cold and calculating, flicked over her overalls, her grease-stained hands, her presence that did not belong in this theater of power. An opportunity bloomed in his mind. He straightened, raising his voice so the crowd could hear. "Well, it seems we have among us a mechanic," he drawled, his smile sharp. "Why not let her take a crack at it? If she can fix our multi-million-dollar prototype, gentlemen, I'll eat my degree." Laughter rippled through the investors, through the engineers who suddenly found courage in numbers. Janelle felt the heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice calm, deliberate. "It's the auxiliary combustion system. The intake is choking on fuel. I can fix it." Her words hung in the silence that followed, absurd and unthinkable to everyone but her. Preston spread his arms theatrically, savoring the spectacle. "You heard her. Let's give our guest a chance. Harland, clear the way. 5 minutes to embarrass herself, then we'll return to reality." The crowd parted, smirks plastered across their faces, phones raised to capture the humiliation. Preston stood tall, certain he had regained control of the narrative, and Janelle, clutching her father's worn tool bag, stepped forward into the harsh light, the weight of every mocking eye upon her. Somewhere deep inside, past the humiliation and the doubt, she felt something else stirring. The same fire that once burned in Elijah Carter's hands now flickered in hers. This wasn't just a dare. It was the first move in a game Preston Maddox didn't yet know he was playing. The hangar felt like a stage, every spotlight angling down on Janelle Carter as she walked toward the crippled Skyhawk X. The smell of burnt circuitry and scorched wiring lingered in the air, mingling with the cologne of investors who had begun whispering to one another. Phones were out now, half of them recording. Gang, the other half sending quick texts to colleagues or competitors. Everyone expected a joke, a farce, a moment of failure to laugh at later, over whiskey. Janelle felt the weight of her father's leather tool bag pull at her shoulder like an anchor. Her steps were steady, though her heart thundered in her chest. She could hear the sneers, the murmurs. This is what desperation looks like. This is what happens when you let a grease monkey near aerospace tech. The lead engineer, Harlan Tate, stood stiff near the console, his expression carved from granite. He didn't even try to hide his contempt. Liam Rivas moved in quietly, pressing a folded schematic into her hands. His eyes darted toward Preston, then back to her. "It's all I could pull up before he noticed," he whispered. His voice shook with a mix of fear and hope. "Don't let them bury you." Preston's voice cut through the murmurs like a whip. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold, our newest consultant. Do take notes. This will be quick." His smile was pure theater, but beneath it was something else, a tightening around the eyes. He wanted her humiliated. He needed it. Janelle crouched near the exposed engine housing. The noise of the crowd dimmed, the heat of the lights faded, and all she could see was steel, wire, and fuel lines. Her father's words whispered in her memory. "Air and fuel must dance, Nell. Too much of one, the music stops. Too little, and it never begins." She unclipped her father's wrench, its handle worn smooth, and slid it against the misaligned valve. The tool fit like it had been waiting for this moment. Around her, laughter continued. Someone muttered, "She's going to strip the housing." Another snorted, 4 minutes left. But Janelle tuned them out. Her fingers moved with confidence born from years of fixing what others gave up on. She rerouted a feed, tightened a coupling with a firm twist, then PR. I'd open a junction box. Sparks leapt as she exposed the panel, and a few investors gasped, half expecting the whole machine to detonate. Janelle's hands didn't waver. She pulled a short length of wire from her bag, stripped it with a blade, and rewired the auxiliary sequence using an unconventional bypass. It was risky, inelegant even, but effective. "Try it now," she called, stepping back with her chest heaving. Her overalls were streaked with grease, her forehead damp, but her eyes burned with clarity. The room fell quiet. Harlan hesitated, glancing at Preston. The CEO gave a mocking little bow. "By all means, humor her." His voice dripped with sarcasm. Harlan keyed the sequence. For 3 eternal seconds, nothing happened. The Skyhawk systems groaned, lights flickering like a dying heart. Preston spread his arms, already savoring the impending collapse. But then, a hum. Low, steady, growing in strength until it filled the cavernous hangar. The Skyhawk X shuddered, then smoothed into a seamless, confident purr. Screens lit green across the consoles. Readouts climbed back to optimal levels, surpassing previous test records. The air thrummed with power, with life. Silence fell, but it wasn't the silence of failure. It was disbelief, the kind that grips a crowd when the impossible has just happened before their eyes. An Air Force colonel leaned forward, eyes narrowed, not with skepticism but respect. An investor muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." Even Harlan's mouth opened slightly in stunned awe. Liam grinned, unable to contain it. "She did it," he whispered. Preston's smirk vanished. For the first time, cracks appeared in his mask. He clapped his hands once, sharp, forced. "Well," he said loudly, his voice brittle, "beginner's luck, nothing more." He turned to the colonel, eager to spin the narrative. "Shows you the resilience of our design, doesn't it? Even a novice can keep it alive." But the colonel wasn't looking at Preston. He was looking at Janelle. "Where did you learn to read diagnostics like that?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Janelle straightened, wiping her hands on a rag. She thought of her father but said only, "Engines are engines. They all speak if you know how to listen." Applause began hesitantly, from one corner, then another. Soon the hangar filled with it, reluctant in some quarters, enthusiastic in others. Preston's jaw tightened as he stood in the center of a story slipping out of his control. Janelle gathered her tools, keeping her expression neutral even as triumph sparked inside her chest. She hadn't just fixed an engine. She had cracked open the fortress of arrogance built around this company. And in Preston Maddox's eyes, dark with fury beneath the pretense of civility, she saw it clearly. This was no longer a dare. This was war. The morning after her improbable triumph, Janelle Carter walked into Hangar 7 with her head held high, but the air inside had changed. Yesterday, she had been invisible, a shadow in grease-stained overalls. Today, silence trailed her like smoke. Conversations stuttered as she passed. Eyes shifted away or worse, locked onto her with barely concealed hostility. What should have been respect curdled into resentment. She had embarrassed them. She had stolen a stage that wasn't hers to stand on. Her workstation turned out to be a cramped desk shoved beside a supply closet, its chair wobbly, its monitor outdated. A calculated insult. Janelle recognized the maneuver for what it was. Preston's way of boxing her in, making her presence look temporary, insignificant. But she unpacked her father's old tool bag anyway, arranging his wrenches and screwdrivers with quiet reverence, like a soldier laying out weapons before battle. Liam Rivas hovered nearby, his nervous smile a rare island of welcome. "I've been told to get you set up," he said in a low voice. "Though between us, I think Maddox hopes you'll quit by lunch." Janelle smirked faintly. Then he's going to be disappointed. For the first few hours, she was given the most menial of assignments. Basic diagnostics, routine system checks, tasks designed to keep her out of the way. She performed each with meticulous precision, refusing to give anyone an excuse to dismiss her. But as she moved through the protocols, her trained eye caught something strange. Calibration parameters, off by just enough to matter. A fraction higher pressure here, an override deactivated there. Not the sort of thing you stumbled into by accident. Her suspicion sharpened when she overheard Harlan Tate berating a junior engineer. "These readings make no sense," he snapped, stabbing at the screen. Janelle drifted closer, quietly studying the data. Her stomach tightened. The fluctuations weren't random. They were deliberate, patterned. Someone had altered the system to fail, and the timing of the adjustments, logged in the system's memory, coincided with her brief absence from her station the day before. Harlan must have noticed her presence because his voice rang out, sharp enough for the room to hear. "Carter, since you're so eager to impress, why don't you enlighten us?" The challenge was bait. Fail, and she would be exposed as a fraud. Succeed, and she would deepen their resentment. Janelle stepped forward anyway. "The intake valve pressure is too high. If you run the system like this, the auxiliary compressor will blow." She pulled up the log, fingers quick over the keys. "Look, someone changed the parameters at 10:47 yesterday morning." A hush fell. Engineers glanced at each other, their expressions shifting uneasily. Harlan's eyes flickered. He had checked the system himself, and if Janelle was right, that meant tampering had occurred under his nose. The tension thickened until, with a grunt, Harlan reset the values. Instantly, the system stabilized, its readings sliding back into safe ranges. "Lucky catch," he muttered, but his gaze swept his team with a sharpness that told its own story. Someone was sabotaging from the inside, and Janelle had just prevented them from pinning the blame on her. Later, Liam caught up with her in the corridor. "You realize someone wanted that to blow up in your face, right? They're setting you up." Janelle's jaw tightened. "Let them try. They'll find I don't scare easy." It was later still, when Liam led her down a quiet back hall to a dusty storage room labeled Archive B, that the real discovery began. The door creaked open, revealing rows of filing cabinets and blueprint tubes stacked like forgotten bones. "Nobody comes here anymore," Liam explained, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Most of the old designs were digitized years ago, but some things never made it into the system." He unfurled a roll of yellowed blueprint across a table. Janelle leaned over it, and the world narrowed to a single line of ink. A propulsion intake design, hexagonal, elegantly simple, yet advanced beyond its time. Her breath caught. She had seen that pattern before, not in textbooks, but in the sketches that covered her father's workshop walls. The date on the blueprint was June 2006, 2 months before he died. Her hands trembled as she traced the lines, her father's voice ghosting through her memory. "The secret is in the flow, Nell. Air and fuel must dance perfectly." This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't parallel innovation. This was his design, buried, rebranded, stolen. As she rolled the blueprint back into its tube, something gnawed at her gut. If her father's work was here, hidden in the archives, then his death hadn't just been a tragic accident. It had been the silencing of a man who refused to compromise. And now, 18 years later, she was walking into the same storm. That night, long after the hangar had emptied, Janelle stayed behind to run diagnostics on a maintenance panel. When she pried it open, her breath hitched. Scratched into the metal, faint but unmistakable, were words carved by a hand she knew as well as her own. "The truth is buried in the blue jet." Her knees nearly gave way. It was his handwriting, her father's, a message hidden in the machine that had outlived him. Proof he had known, right until the end, that his legacy was being twisted. The echo of footsteps startled her. She snapped the panel closed, the secret seared into her heart. Whoever had buried Elijah Carter's truth was still here, still watching. And now, they knew his daughter was digging. The rain had just begun to fall when Preston Maddox called Janelle Carter into his office. From the outside, the space looked like a glass jewel box suspended above the hangar floor, a place meant for spectacle rather than solitude. Inside, however, it was colder than she imagined, pared down, immaculate, every detail curated to project control. A single model of the Skyhawk X dominated his desk, its chrome gleaming under precise lighting. "Ms. Carter," Preston said smoothly, rising to greet her. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've been hearing fascinating things about your first few days. Boldness in the face of failure, remarkable instincts, a knack for inserting yourself into problems." He poured himself a drink without offering her one. "And timing," he added, swirling the amber liquid. "In business, timing is everything, knowing when to accelerate, when to brake, when to fix what's broken, and when to leave it broken." Janelle stood straight, refusing the chair he gestured toward. "I'm just doing the job you gave me." "Temporary consultant," he corrected, his tone clipped. "And as such, you're here to observe and provide input when asked. You are not here to cue SDN protocols or suggest that decades of expertise could be undone by—" His gaze flicked to her grease-stained overalls, a hobbyist's intuition. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Preston let the silence hang, savoring it like a predator testing the edges of its cage. Later, as she returned to her workstation, she could feel eyes on her. Word of the tampered calibration system had spread, and with it came a new chill. Some engineers regarded her with suspicion, whispering as she passed. Others, mostly younger techs, looked at her with something more complicated: respect, mixed with fear of what it meant to stand beside her. By evening, the building was almost empty when she left for the parking lot. The air was heavy with the storm that had been threatening all day. As she approached her car, headlights flared to life behind her. A sleek black Audi rolled up, stopping close enough to splash water onto her boots. The tinted window lowered, and there he was. Preston Maddox, his usual polish marred by the lateness of the hour. "Miss Carter," he called, "a word before you leave." The rain fell harder as she stepped closer, her jacket soaking through. His eyes studied her with a sharpness that stripped away all pretense. "Quite the coincidence, isn't it? Delaney Shaw showing up the same week you walk into my company. Funny how the past has a way of creeping back when you least want it." Her pulse hammered, but her voice stayed level. "Is that what this is for you? An inconvenience? The past?" Preston's lips curved in a humorless smile. "Let's drop the pretense, shall we? I know who you are, Janelle Carter. I knew the moment HR forwarded your application. Elijah's girl with his stubborn eyes and his taste for lost causes." He leaned closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "Your father didn't know when to quit either. And look where it got him. The threat was as sharp as a blade, wrapped in velvet." The rain drummed harder on the roof of the car, drowning the sound of her heartbeat. "So that's what happened?" she asked, forcing steel into her tone. "He wouldn't quit, so you made sure he couldn't." Preston's laugh was soft, mirthless. "Such drama. Your father died in a tragic accident. An accident caused by his own stubbornness, his refusal to adapt to practical realities. He couldn't see that sometimes sacrifices are necessary." His smile thinned. "You seem to have inherited that flaw." She met his gaze, unflinching. "You mean his refusal to compromise safety for profit?" His mask slipped then, just for a second. The arrogance faltered, replaced by something harder, meaner. "I mean his refusal to be a team player," Preston hissed. "Remember this, teams survive, martyrs don't." He rolled the window up, leaving her standing in the rain, drenched but burning with certainty. The next morning, Preston's retaliation began in earnest. Her access badge no longer opened half the doors it had the day before. The diagnostic software she'd been using locked her out mid-task, citing security clearance restrictions. In the break room, whispers trailed her like smoke. Someone had started a rumor that she'd falsified her credentials, that she was a plant sent by a competitor to steal designs. But the final blow came when she returned to her workstation and found, her father's notebook, his most precious possession, missing from her bag. The drawer she'd locked it in was still closed, but the security footage later showed a masked figure moving with insider knowledge, bypassing codes with ease. Someone in the company had taken it, and she had no doubt who had given the order. That evening, unable to sleep, she sat at her kitchen table with Liam and Sahana Patel, another young engineer who had quietly begun to align herself with them. Between them lay a small memory module she had discovered hidden inside the Skyhawk's maintenance hatch. Its casing was scratched, its tech outdated. They worked for hours trying to coax life back into it, and just before midnight, Liam's decryption finally broke through. Static filled the speakers, then a voice, distorted but unmistakable. "If this module is active, I didn't make it. They're using Skyhawk to bury what we built, what we died for." Janelle's hands shook. Her father's voice had reached across 18 years of silence to warn her. He had known. He had left proof. And Preston Maddox had spent nearly 2 decades burying it. She looked at Liam and Sahana, both pale and wide-eyed in the dim kitchen light. "He killed my father's work," she whispered. "And maybe my father too." The storm outside rattled the windows as if echoing her words. For the first time since stepping foot in Ether Dynamics, Janelle understood the true stakes. Preston Maddox wasn't just trying to humiliate her. He was trying to erase her father, erase her from history itself. And she had just declared war on the man who built his empire on a stolen grave. Gray clouds sagged low over the Ether Dynamics airfield, the kind that carried storms inside them like secrets waiting to split open. Inside the control room, the air hummed with tension. Rows of engineers hunched over consoles, their monitors alive with streams of data. Military officials and investors lined the observation deck, clipboards in hand, their polished shoes squeaking against the tile. And at the center of it all, Preston Maddox, gleaming in a navy suit, his smile sharpened into a blade. "This will be historic," he announced to the room. "The Skyhawk X is not just the future of aerospace, it's the future of warfare. Faster, higher, stealthier than anything the world has ever seen." His voice dripped with confidence, but Janelle Carter, standing at the back with a restricted consultant badge, saw something different in the twitch of his jaw, the way his hand tightened on the railing. He was afraid. On the tarmac, test pilot Rick Donovan moved through his pre-flight checks with practiced calm. "Control, all systems nominal, engines primed, ready for sequence." His voice over comms carried that steady baritone of a man who danced with danger before and learned to smile through it. "Proceed, Alpha 7 protocol," Harlan Tate commanded, his voice steady but his eyes betraying unease. He had overseen countless tests, but since Janelle had caught the tampered calibration days earlier, he had started glancing at systems twice instead of once, as though shadows lingered where sunlight used to be. The Skyhawk's engines ignited with a roar, sleek and vicious, its frame trembling like a caged predator aching to be unleashed. It rolled down the runway, lifted clean into the air, and climbed into the gray. For 8 flawless minutes, it was poetry. Rolls, banks, heart, climbs. The Skyhawk moved like an extension of Rick's own body. Preston basked in it, gesturing proudly to the military brass. "As you can see, gentlemen, Ether Dynamics delivers." But then it began. "Control, I'm seeing fluctuations in the main grid," Rick's voice crackled, calm but taut. "Losing thrust." Data spiked across the screens, red warnings blooming like wounds. "Backup systems engaged," one engineer reported, but a moment later Rick countered. "Backup's not responding, control sluggish, altitude dropping." Panic rippled through the room. Engineers barked theories over each other, scrambling to diagnose. Preston's smile vanished. "Stabilize it," he snapped, his voice cracking for the first time. Janelle pushed forward, her eyes locked on a readout. She saw the same pattern she'd memorized 18 years ago in her father's sketches, the failure he had warned about. Her throat went dry. They'd stripped out the safeguards again. This wasn't malfunction, it was murder dressed as engineering. "Rick," she said sharply, forcing her way past security guards. "Listen to me. Under the right console, there's a black switch with a red guard. That's your override." Preston spun on her, his face thunderous. "What nonsense is this? There is no such—" "I see it," Rick cut in, his breathing ragged. "Activating now." 3 seconds stretched into eternity. The Skyhawk bucked once, twice, and then the engine steadied, the nose leveling out. The hum returned, smooth and strong. "Control, I've got her back," Rick reported. "Auxiliary system stable, returning to base." The room erupted in chaotic relief, engineers slumping back in their chairs, officials exchanging hurried whispers. But Janelle wasn't watching them. She was watching Preston. His face had drained of color, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscle twitched. He knew exactly what had just happened. She had saved his plane, his pilot, and his reputation. And in doing so, she had exposed the lie at the heart of his empire. He stormed across the room, seizing her by the arm and dragging her into a shadowed corner. "You installed an unauthorized system on my aircraft?" he hissed, his voice venomous. "I installed a safety measure," she fired back, yanking her arm free. "One that saved your pilot's life and your multi-million-dollar prototype. Or would you rather I'd let him die for your pride?" Preston's lips curled. "This is sabotage, espionage. You've tampered with proprietary technology." "No," Janelle said, her voice rising with a power that silenced the closest engineers. "Sabotage is what killed my father. Sabotage is what nearly killed Rick today, and it's the same pattern, same failure you covered up 18 years ago." For a heartbeat, his eyes flashed pure panic before his mask slid back into place. "You have no proof." "I will," she said, her voice like steel, "and when I do, the world will know what you buried." Moments later, while Preston tried to calm the investors with his silver tongue, describing the near disaster as a planned fail-safe demonstration, 2 security officers escorted Janelle out. Her badge was deactivated before she even reached the gate. Suspension, effective immediately. That night, her phone rang, an unknown number. When she answered, Rick Donovan's voice came through, steady but low. "Whatever you put in that plane saved my life," he said. "But they told me to keep quiet, to call it a system enhancement. I know sabotage when I see it. Someone wanted that bird to fall out of the sky." Janelle sat in the dark of her apartment, her father's stolen voice still echoing in her mind from the cracked module she'd recovered. "They're using Skyhawk to bury what we built, what we died for." The truth had nearly gone down with Rick today, and if Preston Maddox was willing to risk a pilot's life in front of military officials, there was no limit to what he'd do to silence her. She tightened her grip around the phone, her reflection glinting back from the rain-streaked window. "Then it's not just my fight anymore," she whispered. "It's his too. And I'm not done." Outside, thunder rolled over the airfield, as if the storm itself had chosen a side. The courthouse was a fortress of marble and glass, its wide steps swarming with journalists, protesters, and television crews. Signs rose like a forest in the crowd. "Justice for Elijah Carter," "Stop the cover-up," "Innovation needs integrity." The story had exploded across the nation, and now it had drawn all eyes to the trial of Preston Maddox, CEO of Ether Dynamics, the man accused of building an empire on stolen genius. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters tapped furiously on laptops, cameras angled for every reaction, and rows of aerospace engineers sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting to see whether the industry's most powerful name would finally fall. At the defense table, Preston sat immaculate in a charcoal suit, his hair slicked back, his posture the very picture of control. Only his eyes betrayed him, darting, restless, a man who had lost the script. Across the aisle, Janelle Carter rose from her seat. No longer the grease-stained outsider mocked in overalls, she wore a simple navy suit, her father's leather tool bag placed neatly beside her chair like a shield of memory. When the prosecutor called her name, she walked to the witness stand with steady steps, the weight of 18 years pressing down but not bending her spine. "Ms. Carter," the prosecutor began, "you've been described as the individual who uncovered evidence connecting Ether Dynamics' flagship project, the Skyhawk X, to designs created by your late father, Dr. Elijah Carter. Could you tell the court in your own words who your father was?" Janelle's voice carried into the hushed chamber, clear and measured. "My father was a black aerospace engineer, brilliant, tireless. He believed innovation and safety were inseparable, that true progress protected lives, not endangered them. For years, he worked on propulsion systems that were decades ahead of their time, and for that brilliance, he was dismissed, overruled, and finally silenced." The jury leaned in as she described the blueprints hidden in forgotten archives, the module with her father's encrypted message, the sabotage she'd witnessed firsthand in the Skyhawk systems. Every fact was laid out like stepping stones, each one drawing the jury closer to the undeniable truth. Then the defense lawyer rose, sharp as a knife. "Ms. Carter, isn't it true that you are not a licensed aerospace engineer? That your so-called discoveries amount to little more than speculation from a mechanic with a grudge?" The words cut, but Janelle did not flinch. "I may not have your licenses," she replied evenly, "but I have my father's notes, his designs, his voice. I've lived in those blueprints since I was a child. I can see the bones of his work inside every piece of the Skyhawk X, and I have something you can't dismiss as speculation." Her legal team moved quickly, submitting an evidence file no one outside their circle had seen before. The courtroom fell into silence as an old recording filled the speakers. The voices were faint at first, but recognizable. Elijah Carter and a younger, impatient Preston Maddox. "I'm recording this because I need a record," Elijah's voice said, calm but firm. "Preston, you're asking me to remove a critical safety system for the demonstration flight. I've explained the risks, and I'm documenting that you're overruling my objections." "You're being paranoid, Elijah," came Preston's reply, smug, youthful, but undeniably him. "The override makes the system look sluggish. We need investors excited, not worried. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks." "There's nothing calculated about this," Elijah countered. "It's reckless. If anything happens, nothing will happen," Preston cut in. "And if it does, well, that's why we have insurance." The recording ended, leaving only the hollow echo of Preston's arrogance hanging in the chamber. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The jury's faces hardened. Reporters scribbled like their pens might catch fire, and Preston, his mask shattered, his hands twitched against the table, his face drained of all color. The prosecutor let the silence do the work. No further questions. 3 weeks later, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts: corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, conspiracy, and negligent homicide. Preston Maddox, once untouchable, was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Cameras captured the moment he was led away in handcuffs, his legacy collapsing around him like the house of cards it had always been. For Janelle, there was no triumphant smile, only a quiet exhale as the weight of 18 years lifted, leaving space for something new. Justice had finally found her father. Months later, on what would have been Elijah Carter's 60th birthday, a different kind of crowd gathered at the airfield. Engineers, officials, journalists, and school children all stood together, eyes fixed on a sleek aircraft gleaming under the morning sun. Across its fuselage, painted in deep blue letters, was its name. Elijah. One Janelle emerged from the hangar in a flight sim. "Uit," helmet tucked under her arm. She paused before the microphones, her voice carrying over the hush. "This plane represents more than innovation. It represents truth. It represents every voice that was silenced, every genius overlooked because they didn't fit the mold. Today, I'll fly it not just for my father, but for everyone who ever dared to dream in the face of doubt." As the Elijah 1 roared down the runway and lifted into the open sky, the world watched. The live stream broadcast across schools, boardrooms, and homes. Children who had been told they didn't belong in science or engineering saw Janelle at the controls, soaring on wings her father designed, wings she had rebuilt with her own hands. In that moment, justice became more than a verdict. It became a future. And when Janelle landed, greeted by thunderous applause and the sight of a mural freshly unveiled on the hangar wall, her father and herself, blueprint in hand, framed by the words, "We build for those who dare to dream," she knew the legacy had finally been claimed.